The United States will ensure that whoever leads the country next, Iran, will not threaten America or its neighbors, Israel, anybody.
Iran right now is on the brink of collapse. That is a good thing. The Middle East is realigning as we speak. The United Arab Emirates in the past couple of hours just said they may freeze Iranian assets. That will put a chill through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who funnels all its ill-gotten billions into Emirati accounts. As Iran attacks its neighbors, the neighbors are turning to America, evidence the Emiratis. We know this because the Lebanese are now standing up to Hezbollah for the first time in decades. Iran's air defenses have been obliterated, their navy sent to the bottom of the sea. It is their last gasp. With us now, somebody who has been calling for a last gasp to the Iranians for about 20 years, Ambassador John Bolton, former national security advisor under Trump 1.0. Ambassador, things have been going, I think, better than anyone could have expected from the diplomatic standpoint of all of these other countries now aligning behind America and Israel. But given now that we're seeing the Kurds move into Iran, we're hearing the Israelis have already started laying groundwork for special operations inside Iran. You've got the U.S. potentially with an air bridge to be able to supply the Kurds for a ground war in Iran. Are we being fair with the criticism that, oh, there's no plan here for what comes next?
Well, I do think it shows a lot of signs of being made up on the fly. I think the work with the Kurds is important, but they're only a piece of the population, and we don't have good evidence, and I'm not saying it should be made public if it would impair the effort, but there doesn't seem to be much effort with the rest of the opposition inside Iran, and that is going to be key because the opposition has to play a major role in fracturing the regime at the top. So if I had more confidence in that, I would be much more positive about the potential outcome here.
To be fair, though, we're 5 days in. There's thousands of bombs dropping every day on Iran. You could forgive the protesters for not heading out into the streets. The Iranian regime has a vested interest in keeping people locked up. President Trump and others have said, hey, don't leave your house. Again, 5 days in, is it really fair to be making these judgments?
I'm not talking about people going into the streets. I'm talking about people can call a general in the regular army that they think may be sympathetic to the opposition and work with them to
How do we know
talk
that's
about
not happening?
That general is going to bring his... Well, there doesn't seem to be any sign of it, and I know a lot of people inside Iran and people with contacts inside Iran. I'm not relying on the press on this. I'm relying on people who know the country well. And it may be happening, but there are not a lot of indications of it.
Well, one thing that there's a split now on is to whether President Trump, the United States, Israel, should decide who's going to run Iran or decide who this revolutionary figure is, or have a veto, meaning either we pick or is it you pick, and if we don't like who it is, we'll let the Israelis kill them. Which one would you advise?
Well, I think the idea that we're going to somehow affect the person who's selected as the next supreme leader is delusional. They don't care what we think. And in any event, even if they pick somebody we wanted, to me, that person would be unsatisfactory. It would be one person sitting on top of, you want to call something a deep state? I'd call the Revolutionary Guard a deep state. I don't see anybody that could be acceptable to that operation that we would find acceptable. What we need to do is pull the Revolutionary Guard apart, pull the ayatollahs apart, pull the regime apart at the top, find the fragments, exploit the fissures, and by that continue to weaken the leadership as we are weakening its infrastructure and as Israel has considerably weakened the top already.
You look at the map of where Iran has lashed out at its neighbors, thinking that the neighbors would put pressure on the United States and Israel. In fact, the opposite has happened. To me, this speaks to why we should let things go longer. This would be Iran's retaliatory strikes. You think about how the Middle East is changing, that Lebanon is now taking on Hezbollah for the first time. The Emiratis are freezing Iranian assets and the like. Isn't this something that we want to play out over a longer period of time, not shorter?
I think we've got to be patient. I think it's a big mistake to put arbitrary time limits on it. I think it's important for the administration to be making that case publicly, not letting you and me make it. But I do think that the decision by the Iranians to attack the Gulf Arab states was a huge mistake. Apparently, they've also tried to attack Turkey and Azerbaijan. Two more mistakes right there. I don't know what they think their strategy is, but they've wasted an awful lot of missiles and drones that they could have been dropping on U.S. positions or on Israel. So at this point, I do think in terms of the Middle East itself, things are going well for us diplomatically. We still don't have our European allies on board, and I think that's something we need to work with.
Think about this in terms of what this says to the Chinese. Venezuela, Cuba, Panama Canal, Greenland, Iran. Paul Miller made, I think, a very good point here, that all of these are chipping away at what was China's tentacles going out and cutting those off.
Right. Well, I think China and Russia both have suffered a number of reverses. I would start with Syria and the fall of the Assad regime. I don't think Venezuela has had regime change yet, and I'm still worried about how that's playing out. I certainly hope Cuba falls next. That's all to our advantage, no question about it. I want to come back on Europe for a minute. You know, what we need now is counter-drone technology. The missiles that the Iranians have, I think, are being reduced, but the number of drones they have, not clear how well we're doing there. The best counter-drone technology in the world is from Ukraine. And if you want to know the virtue of alliances, this is now, we need to turn to the Ukrainians and say, excuse me, could we lease your technology so we could build cheaper drones and we're not spending $200,000 Patriots on $20,000 Shahed Iranian drones?
And also, Israel realizes that they don't have they're not going to have to fight another ground war. They don't have to fight Gaza. They don't have to worry about Gaza right now. They can pour all of their ground troops into southern Lebanon, and they're already on a war footing as a country. Everybody's going to be in the shelters anyway because of the Iranian attacks. Might as well just deal with it now.
Well, I think the point you made about the cooperation of the Lebanese government in the effort to go after Hezbollah is a historic moment. And to deal a further death blow at one of Iran's terrorist proxies is something the Israelis are not going to miss. And it's a further very significant change in the power balances in the Middle East.
One thing to put just a point on here, we look at that map of all of the attacks by Iran on its Muslim neighbors that have had the opposite effect of what was designed. They hoped that the Muslim neighbors would put pressure on the United States and Israel. Instead, it's pushed the Muslim countries into the hands of the coalition. Do you understand anything beyond what I just said of what Iran's logic is in blowing up hotels in the Emirates and launching at the Kuwaiti embassy and shutting down or blowing up a gas refinery in Bahrain?
Well, I think it's a catastrophic mistake. I think they may have believed that the Gulf Arabs would come to their aid by pressuring us, and they clearly didn't understand. Almost all of the Gulf Arab states want that regime in Tehran changed. They'd like to do it without any fuss and bother. That obviously isn't going to happen. When it comes down to it, the Gulf Arabs, the Saudis, the Emiratis in particular, know that their future stability and security depends on a different regime in Tehran. Once attacked, they're inevitably going to side with us.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.